Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.
I'm Ian Richards, welcoming you to InFocus, a weekly program that takes a closer look at what's happening within and across the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. To change or not to change? That is the question being posed by the government of St. Kitts and Nevis as it pursues a proposal to raise the age of sexual consent and marriage. The move is part of a broader strategy, a broader effort by the government to strengthen protections for children, align laws with the age of majority, and address evolving social issues affecting young people across the Federation. But is the proposal realistic, given the realities of youth culture and social development within St. Kitts and Nevis here? Well, joining us for this important discussion is Azilla Clarke, Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs. And later we'll be joined by Jalen Monzac, who is the President of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, otherwise known as SCNIPA. Stay with us for InFocus as we delve into the national conversation on the age of sexual consent and marriage.
As you may have heard, the Federal Cabinet is pursuing a proposal to raise the age of sexual consent and marriage from 16 to 18 years in alignment with the age of global majority. The legislative amendments are being proposed to broaden the scope of protections for children and minors and to allow for better harmonization of laws and policies that speak to child justice and child protections within the Federation. The Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs has collaborated with the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association to understand public perceptions through a round of consultative engagements. As Minister responsible for Social and Community Development, I am encouraging you, members of the public, to participate by submitting your feedback and voicing your questions and concerns about the proposals and other related issues. The Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs looks forward to hearing more from you as we work towards improving protections and supporting the age-appropriate development of our nation's children and youth.
Thanks for staying with us, and allow me now to welcome back to InFocus the Permanent Secretary within the Ministry of Social Development, Gender Affairs, Azilla Clarke. Welcome.
Thank you, Ian. Always a pleasure to be here.
Right, and we have a very important discussion, one that seems to have captured the attention of the nation, and as mentioned, of course, Mr. Monzac should have been here at the start, but he will join us a bit later, so we'll start off with you. Now, we just heard a bit from, and those who are listening, they may have been able to identify it as the voice of the Minister of State responsible for your ministry, that's Social Development, Gender Affairs, the Honourable Aislinn Phillip. Now, she spoke a bit about the proposal that the government is pursuing to have that consideration to raise the minimum age of consent from 16 to 18 years. And of course, that also means marriage. Tell us a bit about why this is happening right now.
Well, it's not really a right now conversation. The federal government attempted this change back in 2008. However, the parliamentary cycle ended and the legislation was not ready. It's required 3 times. So we have been attempting to address the matter of the age of sexual consent within the Federation. For 2026, the ministry has submitted what we call our legislative agenda to the Attorney General's chambers, and topics such as these are what we've identified as requiring work through legislative changes. The age of sexual consent being 16 is being identified, as the minister indicated, for a couple of reasons. First, protection. The age of majority for St. Kitts and Nevis is the age of 18. And at that age, you are considered to be an adult. We are saying that the decision about sex and dealing with its consequences should be aligned to the age of majority. And that leaves our children of all ages still being protected and classified as children. All right? Secondly, you have the matter of what we call incongruence. So at present, at 16, a child can leave school, a child can get a job, and a child can consent to sex. However, legally, the parent is still legally responsible for them until the age of 18. And so that in and of itself causes a lot of conflict in our families. Because how does a 16-year-old be able to make such big life decisions, but then the parent is still legally responsible for them and the consequences of those decisions? So that's some of the background information as to why it continues to be an area that needs to be addressed.
But you mentioned that it was first, the attempt was first made in 2008. That was like 18 years ago. In fact, it would have been a child. If it was a child, the child would be of legal age right now. So why did it take so long to come back up?
Because social issues are never easy issues to deal with. We need we have to first present the statistics and the case for it, and then you need the leadership to make it happen.
Is there an appetite for it?
Appetite is a double-edged sword. Because from what we've been engaging with the public for, there is an acknowledgement that this gap, these rights given to children at 16 has to be addressed. And so when we looked at it, when we made the proposal, it was definitely based on the child protection lens that we look through. What we see from reports and the impact of unlawful carnal knowledge and early sexual activity amongst our teens by those that are of age to consent themselves. We want to make it abundantly clear that we are not here to regulate sex amongst teens. Exploration is a part of life, and that happens. What we're here to say no to is exploitation. Adults, persons over the age of 18, who does not respect the exploration that naturally happens amongst teenagers, that do not permit for the space for that exploration to happen without the consequences of adulthood. Consequences which include but are not limited to pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, and the psychological impacts of self-esteem and self-worth when you simply take from a child and do not pour anything back into that child. And that's what happens when you engage in early sexual encounter. It doesn't, very few of them last in or result in long-lasting relationships that a person can go into and with. They become transactional, and that sets a very bad precedence for a child when they begin to think that their sexual worth is just transactional and not as an expression of love, caring, and deep emotion.
And there's a lot that you said that we will unpack later on in the program, of course, because it's interesting what you have said. But before we get into that, I just want to, in the absence of Mr. Monzac, ask about the relationship between the Ministry, Social Development, and SCANIPA.
Certainly. This is a young people topic, all right? So we wanted to make sure to engage the youth voice. And in the absence of a National Youth Council, the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association is one of the stronger voices for youth. And they've also debated this topic themselves in Parliament, and so we definitely wanted to partner with a youth voice to be able to bridge the gap between us, the technicians, who see the data and the reality, and the young people that actually live within it.
Okay. And so that certainly is something interesting that we'll have to explore when he gets here in terms of having that debate themselves and what the outcomes would have been. But let's talk a bit about what you said earlier, a change will strengthen protection for minors. I suppose then I would have to ask, based on what you're saying, that it is the ministry's, I don't want to say intent, because of course it's a discussion, but it is their preference to have the age raised.
Correct.
Some persons may say then that irrespective of their opinion, that change will take place.
It's not irrespective of. The value of the consultation is to allow us to see what our blind sides are. Because data leads us in one way, but this is a lived experience for many. And therefore, we would need to hear from the public what things we may be missing in our consideration of an increase to the age of sexual consent. What are their expectations for the system? What are their fears as it relates to what is happening now and what may happen as a result? So I don't want people to think that it is a fait accompli. It is something that we are moving towards. If during the public consultation it comes out that it is an adamant no, we will have to give consideration to what that is, because legislation is one thing, but where this decision lies is within family, homes, communities. The social side of life is where this amendment will live itself out, and we need to understand what are those considerations as well.
Okay, Mr. Monzac is here with us, and so I would just ask the producers to get him mic'd up so he can join the conversation as well. All right, so we're going to take a break while they do that.
No problem.
Welcome back to InFocus, and we are joined by Mr. Jalen Monzac, who is the president of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association. I imagine persons get that wrong all the time.
Yes, persons do get it wrong all the time, and we have to correct and say, it's St. Kitts National. Eventually, at some point in time, maybe not in my presidency, but we'll change it to Nevis. But for now, we're focused on St. Kitts.
Well, of course, I certainly would encourage that change. And so, welcome. You're here with Ms. Clarke, and we're discussing, of course, the discussion, the national conversation that is taking place to have a change in the consent, the age of consent for marriage and, of course, sexual relations. So Ms. Clarke was speaking a bit about SCANIPA's involvement, mentioning, of course, that there was a debate. Before we get into that, though, I want you to share a bit about SCANIPA for those who may not know what the association is about.
Thank you, and absolutely. The SCANIPA, which is commonly known as SCANIPA, we are known as the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, and we've been in existence for over 24 years. We started in 2001, September 13th to be exact, and we represent the voice of the young people. We are the premier youth organization in St. Kitts, as well as in Nevis, but our focus is primarily in St. Kitts. And one of our main aims is to amplify youth voices, and how we do that is through mock parliament sitting. We do training sessions with our members in terms of parliamentary sitting, debating, and we also go out into our community as much as possible through volunteerism. And we do a lot of collaborations and partnerships. Specifically speaking about this initiative, we are partnering with the Ministry of Social Development and Gender Affairs in relation to helping them with rolling out this campaign and getting the youth voices as a part of it.
So how did the relationship come about? Was everybody invited by the ministry, Ms. Clarke, or was it just natural that they participated?
Well, they were invited by the ministry, engaged specifically because, again, they have debated the topic previously, and they are indicated that as indicated, they are the premier youth voice. So we did not just want to come at it from the ministry standpoint, but we definitely wanted to have the youth presence, not just in engagement, but also in planning and execution, so as we can target and get a well-rounded response.
The operations primarily is in St. Kitts, as Mr. Monzac just said. There are some who might have said then, why not seek out an association on Nevis to have that balance?
We have spoken to our counterpart ministry on Nevis about the campaign, and there are plans afoot to be able to have a similar approach executed on Nevis.
Okay. Mr. Monzac, tell us a bit about the debate that took place now about this this particular topic within the association.
Yes.
Mock sitting of Parliament.
Yes, so if memory serves me right, it came out in about 2022, if I'm correct, and we were approached by actually the AIDS Secretariat in relation to a number of issues, but one of them was the age of consent conversation. And you know, naturally in Parliament, we have the government side and we have the opposition side. So a part of the debate, I was a part of the debate, I think I was on the government side. And basically for us, our argument was that if the age of consent is 16, how is it that persons can vote at the age of 18? How is it that persons can get a driver's license? And all of these things, and they're recognized at the age of 18. So we recognize that there's a gap between this age of 16 and 18. So that conversation would have started surrounding that. And then we were approached by the ministry in 2025, to actually do this campaign. So we're excited to jump on board of that because we had that conversation prior in terms of the age of consent conversation. So for us, it was just really, for the general consensus was that there's a gap and it needs to be addressed. So we are really happy to see that the ministry is actually, you know, pushing forward in terms of addressing that gap. So thank you for listening to us.
And that is something that has been common with Scanaipa. They've been so active and so proactive over the years, is that you see that they have shaped the national conversation, help to influence laws. I know the deputy, well, he's currently the minister responsible for youth empowerment, that would be the Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Dr. Jeffrey Handy, and he's long been a supporter, one of the founders of Scanaipa. And of course, when he was Director of Youth, he would have channeled some activities, some of the initiatives that they would have done, some of the discussions that took place, and that actually helped to shape actual laws such as the seatbelts. That's something very important. Right. So, Ms. Clarke, you said that a change will help to strengthen protections for minors. How will raising the age help to reduce exploitation and abuse?
Okay. Good question. I think we've had that as a concept. So, as stated, we are not about at present, the law does not regulate sex amongst juveniles because they cannot consent. So anything that happens amongst them is dealt from a social standpoint. And I used the analogy last night, what we want to do for that gap is to extend the bubble of protection up to the age of 18. And that will categorically state in St. Kitts and Nevis that our children are cannot consent to or engage in particular acts. That's the statement. That's the value. That is something we'll teach moving forward. With that protection now, any person that violates that will be treated as such, right? We know that there must be complementary legislation, a build-out of the system, programming and services to be able to ensure that the covering that we are metaphorically using does its job that it's supposed to do, which is to cover our children. So we do know of the instances of grooming, exploitation, and all of those that happens with older, male and females, with younger boys and girls. And therefore, through our discussion, a lot of those points have been raised, and so we know that we now have to go back and look at strengthening the legislation around matters of grooming, exploitation, and the related matters, just the way that you engage with. Culturally, we have the catcalling, we have even the way we relate, some of the things we say to persons, All of that has to begin to be looked at, not just from a legislative, but also from a societal way. We have to begin deeper conversations with what we call our agents of socialization, our parents, the schools, the church, the media, to make sure that that protection, that proverbial bubble, is as strong as possible. The sexualization of our children, through lyrics, song, prose, all of those we have to begin to have conversations about. How do we protect our children from that? Not to say that, again, we are making them ignorant of the world, but making sure there are sufficient alternatives that is respectful of the phases of development to get them there so that when they encounter such, they have a sounder base and foundation to engage with the next topics.
Mr. Monzac, weigh in on that.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so from the youth perspective, let's talk from the youth perspective. Maybe I should ask you to repeat the question again.
We were speaking about how will the change in the raising the age, how will that help to protect children against that exploitation? Because Ms. Clarke was speaking about the catcalling and the socialization aspect of it.
Yeah, okay, well, generally there's a consensus that the older, let's say the older men, that they prey on younger girls, for example, in relation to increasing the age from 16 to 18. Now what happens is that those persons who are 16, they're not participating, or it shouldn't be that they're participating it shouldn't be that they're participating in sexual activities because the age is raised from 16 to 18. As a result of that, the whole idea is that it limits the predatory behavior. So no longer is it that you're 16. No longer is that you're 16.
No, go ahead.
Yes. No longer is it that you're 16, and yet persons could say, okay, well, that person is 16, she's 16, so that it isn't wrong, if you understand what I'm saying, basically. So no, because you remove that sort of excuse, basically you could say it's an excuse, that, I'm a bus driver, I'm 40, and the law said 16. So what's wrong with it? Right? So the whole idea behind of it moving from 16 to 18, protects that 16-year-old, because you shouldn't be having sex based off of the eyes of the law. So for me and a lot of people, that's what they see it as, in terms of that 16 is too young to have sex. Right?
And it's funny, as I was preparing to come on the program, I was speaking to a young person and she told me, 16 is putting it to 18 you have to wait too long. At 16 I'm able to work, why can't I have sex? Why can't I get married?
And that's what we're saying. We understand that our legislation has not kept abreast of life. When we did our exploration of why the age of employment is set as 16, that is dated back to our sugar industry and agricultural based years, when you needed young strapping persons in the labor force. So the earlier they can start, the easier. And also, we did not have universal access to education, so there was always a set of young persons that could not advance through to completing school, and therefore work was always available for them. Starting from when our first national hero made education universal, and all of the other gains, to expanding it now all the way up to junior college associate's degree level, you have more students opting to stay in school than to start their work life. So I understand within what is currently permissible, her answer is fair and just. But we are saying that the situation, economic, social, psychological, all of those, health, everything that goes into making a determination of what's in the best interest of the child, we are seeing the necessity to move it upwards.
Does having sex at an early age impact a person's cognitive and emotional maturity?
Good question. Not just having sex, it is what is in front, what should come in front of the sex. Is the relationship that ends in the act of sex something that builds you and is grounding you? What we are seeing is that we are not providing sufficient spaces for young people with the current legal right to have sex at 16 to build on those relationships. Sex is now becoming transactional in nature. All right, and with that transaction in nature, because the cognitive development for consequences, emotional intelligence is not yet there, simple words of platitude eases, warms the heart and gives the girly feelings, and then the next thing is to encounter that, to expand those feelings into the sexual act, but not understanding that when the twitters and the flutters die down, did you get from the engagement what you should have? A sense of peace, a sense of connection, or was it just I felt used, I felt taken advantage of, and I got nothing out of it? That's more the experience that we're hearing than what is supposed to happen with sex. And so that's what we are saying is the act of sex happens within a bubble of other things happening. It's a nice little morning tea. So, you have the hot water, the bush, and the sugar, the honey. And we've slowly taken away different elements of it, and sex alone cannot be it. Sex in the context of something is what we are aspiring to make sure, that our young persons have sufficient time to build the skills and experiences so that when it comes down to the act, they can get the best from the act and also deal with the consequences of the act.
Now, persons may ask then, why 18? Why not 17? If you're going to talk about giving me a little bit more space to become more mature, why can't I be ready at 17? And Mr. Monzac had wanted to weigh into that, of course, as well.
Right, because we're also attempting to make various alignments with our legislation. So the age of majority is 18. That is also colloquially called your adulthood. So you vote, you drive, you drink, and all these other adult behaviors. And that for us is the ultimate age. I don't think we have, in some jurisdictions, something else happens at 21, but in our jurisdictions, everything culminates at 18. And so therefore, we would need much more justifications than just what we're using now, the data, the psychological, the cognitive, to then ask for it to go up, because voting, driving, and drinking are some of those more foundational adult-related behaviors, and we would need much more to put it up any higher, because as you said, if the 16-year-old cannot wait, I cannot imagine what the 18-year-old would tell me that I'm asking them to wait until 21 or 25.
Yeah, in addition to what Azilla said, I was going to talk about the age of majority, but also, just culturally, we see the age of 18 as that, okay, adulthood, right? And for me, like when the proposal came of moving it from 16 to 18, I was like, okay, I mean, I agree, it's just 2 years. That, you can wait, I think. So the age of 18, to me, at this stage, it's a good number to say. It's not too high, it's not too low, it's not too far from 16, but 16 is it's too close to high school, if you look at it from that way as well too. So, in addition to what Azilla said in terms of it being the age of majority and bringing everything that you can drive, you can vote, you can drink alcohol at that age, I think that's also a good age as well too. There was conversations, during the campaign, we went to a high school, to the Washington Archibald High School, and many persons, they were in agreement. There was third to fifth farmers, and they were in agreement that 18 is a good number. There was a few persons that said, oh, you should be 21, and some people, our teacher was like, oh, you should be 25, right? So there will be continuous conversations surrounding it. But, because it's a cultural thing that we see 18 as the age of where, you're quote unquote an adult, I think that it's a good number to start with. I remember Azilla said something yesterday in relation to, when we had the panel, the town hall, that in this generation right now, this is what we need. But at some point in time, there'll still be continued revision. So maybe like in 20 years from now, we'll be having a conversation about it being 25. Mm-hmm.
Was that surprising to hear the students at the school?
Actually, yes, it was. It was surprising because this is something that is impacting them mostly in terms of that generally if it's one thing that a lot of persons know, is that the age of consent is 16. A lot of persons, they could tell you, that if it's one that they could say, is the age of consent is 16. Right? So you would expect that, there will be a sort of like, really? So I have to wait until 18? Because, naturally there are persons who, you could say, are engaging in sexual activity, right? So when we went there, they were excited to have the conversation. I was by the window, because it was one of our members doing the discussion, and I was listening to some of the conversations. And one girl, you could see she was so excited, and I was like, "Oh, you're happy to be here?" She was like, "Yeah, I like these kind of conversations here," And as I said, when we asked them to raise their hands, like persons shot up their hands, I agree that it should be from 16 to 18. And it all goes back to the general conversation that persons feel as if that there are predators out there. So even not just us as adults, but persons within the schools as well too, feel as if that they are the predators. I could name them out, the busmen, those kind of things. So they see it as protection for them as well too. That, okay, 2 years I could wait. And, it protects me from these predatory behaviors.
But there are, of course, as you mentioned, Ms. Clarke, that there will be some tolerance, some permissions, so as you speak, in terms of peer-to-peer, persons who are underage, because, of course, the intention is not necessarily to stop persons from having sexual relations. There are some persons who would ask if that really is realistic, but it's to guard against the exploitation of such. But there are others now who would say, well, why isn't that a concern? So to have persons, if there is going to be that, as you mentioned, the concern about what happens before sex or before marriage, if there's going to be concern about that cognitive and the mental effect on young persons, having two persons of the same age, that may be even more challenging because they don't fully understand what they're engaging in, and the risks that would come out of that certainly is something that should be considered.
But I think that's just a chime in. But just bounce off what Azilla said, I think that in those situations, like as I've been hearing Azilla and the ministry has been saying that they're not trying to limit exploitation. Exploration, but it's more about protecting the children from the predators. That's what I gather from it. And I also heard Azilla speak in relation to that, for those situations of persons under the age of 18, they will deal with it from a social aspect. So I guess this is where education comes in for the ministry. I would have seen that you guys have plans surrounding that. Maybe you could probably share some of that if you do.
Certainly. We are not blinded by the fact that kids are not going to be curious. And as we stated, we want a protection around that. We're not here to teach abstinence. We're not here to say no sex. I think we've evolved as a community where you want persons to have safe sex. And so, but we are also cognizant of the fact that that messaging has to start with the parents, because what we are avoiding as well is an overreach of the state. Now, of course, my ministry contains the Department of Probation and Child Protection Services, and I always say to parents that we're in a love relationship here, because while the child is yours, yes, that's by birth, they're also a citizen of the state, and we share in the responsibility to keep them protected. And so the legislation goes up to there. What is happening amongst children, it is accepted that the agents that are to protect children, family, church, community, state, must be doing its job there, because once they attain the age of majority, they are relying on that foundation and the acquisition of their own knowledge. So we are not going into those discussions around, we're not measuring our success by whether or not teens will stop have sex or how many more will have sex. With support from our international agencies, we would like to do further surveys around early introduction of that. We had a health professional that joined us at the town hall last night that spoke to a UNICEF study that spoke about how early teen girls and teen boys had their first sexual encounter. And what has been the risk factors related to that. And that's a little bit more exploration that we want to have, because how that will be addressed is by strengthening parents, strengthening education, strengthening health services, so as to delay that first introduction. So that we want children to aspire to leave off those behaviors until adulthood. All right? But where that is not possible amongst exploration, as we stated, that is dealt socially. So that is where we bring in the parents of both children. We speak about what their expectations are, because now you have a new life that is in the equation, not just the two that are there. And we have our Project Viola Teen Parent Program that helps with some of those matters, as well as our general social protection system that wraps around additional services for households that have children born of children.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because of course there are several factors that must be considered, and you mentioned of course teen pregnancy. That's something that we can talk about. But before I get there, I want to speak about sex education and contraception, the availability of contraception. Of course, that has long been a very hotly debated topic. Should it be allowed? Should it not be allowed? Are you encouraging children to have sex if you provide them with contraception? How will a change in the age of consent affect sex education and the availability of contraception for children?
Sure. In the area of sex education, the Ministry of Education has indicated that they have a new health and family life education curriculum that is being rolled out across our school systems. What that allows for is for the inclusion of professionals to be able to speak to certain topical areas and give teachers that may not have that training and level of comfort to be able to, because in one of our engagements with the youth parliamentarians, even amongst their age group, they remember their teachers' reluctance to talk anything about sex and reproductive health. And so therefore, their knowledge base was not founded from school. They had to go out and research and get additional information from that. And we are saying that health has now established the basic foundation that is taught in schools. If it's not the forte or the training of teachers, then health educators, social workers, psychologists, and the like doctors will come in and teach our children about that, because we eventually have to take the taboo out of sex. Yeah. All right? And so that's on the sex education. The availability of contraceptions now, during this discussion, it has come up that we need to make some exemptions for that. So, you know, once it is medically necessary for a child to be on birth control and contraception, the space must be provided for that. Because again, our legislation says that the parent must give consent. And some parent-child relationships are complex and do not provide the foundation for ease of conversation that may leave the child susceptible to infections, disease, and the like. And so we need to expand that through the provision of medical exemptions. Once it's medically necessary, the child will be able to do so. A conversation we might have to advance during the first and second reading of the bill would have to be looking at that. Would one of those exceptions be that once a teen is pregnant, that you attain at least that autonomy to start to make your own medical decisions, because your body must feed a child up to an age, and then now somebody else is depending on you. And so therefore your health decisions is something that you have to take more personal than before. Your parent can make those decisions, but once you have become a parent in and of yourself, that right now is granted to you. But that's a further discussion we have to ask the public.
I was just say that's a further discussion, because that brings up all kind of things in terms of, you know, the person hasn't really gotten the child as yet, so are they really a parent at that stage? So, you know, in terms of the access situation. But in relation to the contraceptives conversation though, for me, on my end, I feel as if that to have it there available, it's important, because between the ages of 11 to 18, 19, that's the age of exploration, and it's going to happen. So rather than prevention is better than cure, basically. So not necessarily encouraging, but to say, okay, this is here, this is available. And also in terms of the health and family life conversation and going to guidance counselors, as there was a mention there about that, the general approaching the topic of sex. It's like, it's sex, I don't really want to talk about it. And then now persons at that age are exploring, so they have to go and find information somewhere else, or they just go and they put it out there experience it for themselves, and then there's no support there. So, it's always, I commend the Ministry of Education for what they're doing, but there's even more that needs to be done in terms of sex education and just having that general conversation surrounding sex, basically. Even with this as well too. When we went onto the streets, in the city to ask persons their feedback on this, and they were just some persons who didn't want to speak on camera about it. So that's just a reflection of how we approach, the conversation of sex. And it's not the best approach, especially for, persons within that age group, which is you're interested, you want to know more about it, and rather than them going and explore and making, silly mistakes, let's make the intervention.
Right. And so how has the conversation been unfolding? Mr. Monzac mentioned engagement in school, mentioned on the streets just now. There was also talk about a town hall, which during the break there would have been some pictures persons would have seen on the town hall that was held yesterday. And I understand that the turnout was not the best. Again, that's something that we could have a whole other show on. But how has the conversation been unfolding?
I'll let Monzac take that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we launched the campaign about 2 weeks ago, and we initially launched it on social media. All we did was we posted a poster, and we said, proposal to increase the age of consent from 16 to 18, and proposal to deal with the marriage conversation. And social media went on a firestorm. The poster was shared on person's statuses, I said on person's statuses, plenty of bloggers, they also started that conversation as well too. And when you go to the comments and in the various platforms, they were, oh yes, finally they're doing something to increase the age of consent, and going back again to the predatory nature. So there was a lot of conversations, a lot of think pieces as well too on it as well. So we moved from social media, we went on to radio, and we did a lot of radio discussions, and they were pretty pleasant. And once again, the general thing was, oh great, this is finally happening. When we went now into the actual going out into the public, as I mentioned, there was a lot of persons shying away from it, and that was a bit reflected as well too at the town hall as well. It was advertised across. Minister spoke about it, SKNS posted it, SKNIPA posted it, the ministry posted it. We reached out to groups as well too, but persons didn't show up. For me, what I think it is just that persons are like, as I said, most persons they want it to happen, especially in the adult sphere. They want it to happen, so I don't think that there's more that they want to add to it just for it to happen. Like, when is it going to happen, basically? When we want to do some interactions with the churches as well too. We had a pastor there last evening, and he gave some good perspectives, so we're looking to do some more engagement along that end, but generally the feedback from it has been, as I said, like positive, that we want this to happen, because again it goes back again to the whole predatory situation. There were some negative comments, not necessarily negative, but there were some alternative comments in relation to why not fix the other areas in terms of, like, for example, bring a sex offenders registry and those kind of things. So I mean, for now, the conversation is surrounding that, but I'm sure that the ministry has noted those expectations.
It's interesting, as you mentioned, that there seems to be that widespread support for it. The question that I would ask is, how are these consultations being conducted? Because it sounds like it's group setting. Now, in a group setting, I may not want to necessarily stand apart, especially if I'm someone who has an opposing view on whatever the topic may be, and certainly this one, because there is that connotation that is associated with someone. You don't want to be seen as someone who likes and engages. Right, absolutely. So how do you ensure that persons are able to speak freely and really express what is in their heart as opposed to just going along?
Yeah, so what we've done, or what we did, we created a survey. So persons could have, it was on our social media, you could have gone and click it, and you could have said, okay, this is my feedback based off of it. And it was completely anonymous, completely free, like no sort of, you have to go into a ministry to fill out anything. It was done online. And we received about 100 responses so far, and counting. We also had the opportunity for persons to give at the town hall to give their feedback. If they didn't want to raise their hand, they could have given it there.
In the question box.
Yeah, the question box. And we also use some of those questions to inform our town hall discussion. So what we've been doing is like a multi-sector approach in terms of we have the in-person, we have the online, we have the you could even probably send an email to the ministry if there's so many avenues and so many platforms. And you speak about the group setting, and I was just going to go back to the engagement at the high school. That was a group setting, and there were persons. I remember this one guy, when they was asked who wants it to stay at 16, he was stand up in the chair and he put up his hand up in the air and said, I wanted to stay at 16. So there are persons that would vocalize what I have to say, basically. But as I said, the general, for me, I feel like yes, there's the topic of sex, but I feel like a lot of persons are just like, we want it done. We're ready for this to go.
And if I could add also, I think it's showing the difference between the generations.
Right.
The young people are not afraid to talk about sex.
Right.
They actually want us to engage with them more about it, to understand where we come from and what they experience. So they're not concerned that if I talk about sex, forever I'm going to be labeled as the young lady who stood up in a public meeting and said, I want to have sex, because I'm sure the young man got no bullying off of saying that he wanted it there. It's for our generation that have always learned that it is more of a taboo topic that is needed. So the survey is there, as well as all of the online opportunities to contribute to the discussion.
In a confidential way.
In a confidential way, yes. We never release who. All of our surveys are done anonymously, and if the persons care to send a directed comment or feedback to any of the Facebook handles, we never indicate the person that said it. What we've also noticed is that there are a few key sectors that need to be engaged. So you have like the Bar Association, the Medical Association, and others like that, the Mental Health Association, just to be able to garner their additional context and viewpoint on it. So yes, there's space for those additional outreach. So the campaign does not end, as stated, even when the legislation is in its various stages of reading and being approved. We will also be continuing to address some of the issues that have been raised during this campaign, as well as sharing additional opportunities for feedback within there.
Just wanted to just chime in for a bit as well, in terms of the data as well that we've captured. It's not just qualitative data in terms of just the interactions, but there's also the quantitative aspect. So we did several polls on the ministry, so you could just say, are you in favor? Are you against? Yes, no. And that's also anonymous as well too. So we've been trying our best to engage as much as possible, and as I said, this also impacts a lot of the young persons. So we've been reaching them where they are. So the Instagram, the Facebook, etc.
So, but the expectation largely persons would expect it's slanted towards females, but boys are also at risk. So have males generally have that same feedback? Have they given that same willingness to have these protections in place?
But actually, there was going back to the same conversation at the high school. There was this young man afterwards, and he was saying, well, the law protects women. What about men? So there was that. It was surprising to me, because I was like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, what are we doing? And he was actually talking to one of your officers to say, that more needs to be done there. So that there's that conversation in terms of the protection of men. In the room, there was more females, naturally more females than men, but from remembering, I would say a good majority of men, they were again in agreement with the moving from the 16 to the 18 conversation. But that's a wider conversation in terms of the gender imbalances, and there's a whole concern that there's a marginalization of men as well too, just across the whole nation. So it moved from where men were, top performers to where it's like females are kind of shadowing out, and the persons are seeing it in terms of with respect to the law, that they have a bit more protections culturally, that they are more like a bit more favor to men. But I remember hearing Azilla speak about in terms of that, even the language of law, that moving it from genders to victim and those kind of conversations. I think that this legislation as well too would encapsulate that, and other legislation to come would also do that as well too.
And speaking of that, speaking of the legislative change also, rape is defined by penetration. Buggery is the connotation for anal sex. And so you could understand even the language we use in our laws makes men feel, but that's not what happened to me. I was raped. They would like the same covering of definitions. And so we're also looking at that as well. Because, if a male has charges of buggery, chances are, just because of our colloquialism and associations, they will be less likely to report that. But if they gave the same coverage of saying, I was raped, sexually assaulted, and the like, that covering allows us to be able to unpack and be able to respond to those issues as well.
Just quickly, because imagine there's only 8 minutes left
Sorry.
of the program. As it relates to marriage, of course, St. Kitts and Nevis is fast becoming a melting pot, different cultures. And of course, different cultures have different rules that relates to marriage. And so, how is that going to be handled? Because of course, as I mentioned, there are different rules. There are some that allows a male or a female to be married to someone who's much younger. In fact, there are even those who are betrothals, that's still around.
Betrothals, yeah.
It's still around. So how is that going to be managed under this piece of legislation, especially given that there are some economic citizens who may be engaging in such?
Yes. The proposal, currently the age of marriage is 18, but it allows a stipulation for it to happen at 16 with parental consent. And that stipulation is what this amendment will remove, and therefore set the age of marriage at 18. And so what it will require, once within the jurisdiction of St. Kitts and Nevis, you can only marry. But yes, we understand the colloquialisms of betrothal, so you can be betrothed to someone, and that is more of a religious contract. You also have within some religions, even we don't, they already know that's the person that they are to marry for or to be in concert with. I have to get the terminologies. And so because of the fact that St. Kitts and Nevis is becoming a melting pot, we have to be able to respond to not having our laws used to be exploitative in and of itself. And so that removal is there because we all acknowledge that marriage, the sanctity of marriage is not regulated, but within that, there are more times than often, especially when you have a distinct age difference, a power differential as well. And with that, in most times, the bride or the wife loses her ability to exercise all of those rights, to seek employment, and therefore and loses the right to determining her family planning schedule or what she will desire. And the United Nations Population Fund has a wonderful article that explains what every year lost for education, every additional child within childbearing ages, what that has an impact both economically and psychosocially. Economically for the person and the community, as well as psychologically for the individual. Now, we would, of course, like to be able to have our studies give that for our own, but of course, we use the regional studies as further guidelines to say the less time any child, male or female, spends in school, professional and personal development has spillover effects as they age. And so we want to make sure that they have full access to all of those opportunities.
How do you respond to persons who may suggest that this agenda is being driven by the international community, that it is something that is not for St. Kitts and Nevis, but because of conventions, because of geopolitics, we must do that?
I would ask the person to explain to me what is wrong with one act in St. Kitts ticking off additional considerations. We have a colloquialism that says killing using one stone to kill multiple birds. We have the distinction of being the first English-speaking country to sign on to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It is 35 years last year. We're going into our 36th year. Every year every 3 to 5 years we make our report, and yes, the report would make mention of the fact that you need to reconcile, you need to reconcile. None of that pressure from the time we signed 35 years ago till today has moved the dialogue. Again, international agencies can only request. They cannot come into a jurisdiction and demand. As stated, we tried this since 2008. Skinniper debated it in 2022. We're now here in 2026. And so it has to be coming out from within. Now, of course, it would be nice that if it does change, we can be able to tell the international community, yes, we have done so, but it's not a requirement. We do not stop being a signatory because we do not comply with all of the parameters of it. And as for the geopolitical, I don't think it applies in these social ends because the United States, unfortunately, does not lead in many of these social arenas. They're not a signatory to this Convention on the Rights of the Child. And some of their state, federal makeup makes it difficult for a lot of these social issues to be done because states have different ages, parameters, even within the federal guidelines, they allow everything within. So geopolitical may not, what I can say though is that across the OECS and CARICOM, there's been more conversations around this. In addition to St. Kitts and Nevis, Grenada is also having that discussion, and Barbados had that to move their age. No, still is, but Trinidad has moved up their age. So even within us, and I think it's more for us of a protection, not necessarily any external pressure that's saying you have got to do this for your children. Yes, the experts at UNICEF and others request that we give consideration to it, but it all comes down to what we are seeing on the ground and requires the action.
But what about the point that Mr. Monzac raised, because it's a question that I had as well too. Why not change the exploitation practices of some predators as opposed to changing the law itself?
Because how do you change the exploitation? We've not got an alternate proposal as to how to stop the exploitation because penalties, when we read through the Offenses Against the Persons Act, penalties for having any engagement with children under 14, under 16 are pretty sizable. So it's not penalties. The system as we know it with reporting, what I do take from the discussion is that the system has to do better because the public knows that for the data we have on reports, what they see coming out as charges, prosecution and sentences do not align. Everybody knows of at least 10 other cases that happened that nothing ever was done for. That is something that we have to take a look at and be determined and distinct in addressing. Because once we say that the protection has expanded, that is what I get most of the time, persons saying, well, Ms. Clarke, you all already can't do enough for the under 16. Now you're going to add 2 more years, 3,000 more children. How are you going to do that? On it. And I said, for me personally, you could bring it all on because we want to do it. But I understand the system is not just our ministry. So we have to do a better job of making sure that reports, there are safe spaces for children and adults to make reports of everything that is happening that is not conducive to the development of children. With a report, there should be a proper investigation, and whether or not it goes prosecution or social, the public must see a response. And that is what we're also strengthening. We take it from the town hall yesterday that we need to do more outside of preparing our minister's speeches for budget. We need to sort of like the state of the children addresses and releasing our data, confirming with the public what is supposed to happen so that they know what to expect when they engage with the system. And if it doesn't work, where they go to make a complaint when it doesn't work for them as well.
Is there a timeline for these consultations?
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we started, as I said, about 2 weeks ago. So we started mid-March, and we're going to run until the end of April. So we've engaged with schools, well, a few schools. We have some more schools to engage with. We want to engage with the church community as well, too. And, right now it's Lent, so we're allowing them that space, but we engage with them as well, too. At the end of the project, Sniper, we've been collating the data, so we'll present that data to the ministry. So within that time frame, I guess in relation to when the actual parliamentary process would begin,
Yes.
I think it will be within this year.
Yes,
Within this year, so you should expect changes. I hope I'm not speaking.
No. Go right ahead.
Yeah,
Yes, the minister has indicated that she would like it before the start of the new school year. So we'll have the first reading. It goes back out for public consultation, and then the second and third reading, final passage, to be able to be in place. So that also allows us to take the recommendations, suggestions, and issues that persons raise in this initial stage to strengthen and buttress so that we may be in a better position come September to do as the Act requires.
I'll end because we're out of time.
Sorry.
With almost the same way I started in terms of in the questioning. What if there is a no? Because it seems like the train has already left the station. What if the feedback no that comes in, or there is feedback to that legislation that says no, don't change the age?
Then we don't. We go back and address the issues that are giving rise to the no to be able to make another submission.
Right. Okay. Jalen, Monzac, Azilla, Clarke, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of InFocus. Certainly a lot more that we had to discuss, but we are just out of time.
Not a problem.
Always come back at the
Always.
end of the process and
Yes.
update the public in terms of what the findings are and present it in a scientific way. I think that would be important to help to inform the debate that will be taking place in the Parliament as well too.
Wonderful, we will.
Right. All right. So we'd like to thank you, viewers and listeners, for joining us for this edition of InFocus. We trust that you will join us next week at the same place at the very same time. I wish you a blessed and peaceful Easter. For now, I'm Ian Richards. So long.
Join us every Wednesday for InFocus, a weekly talk show produced by the St. Kitts Nevis Information Service, where we provide exclusives with key persons within the government and discuss pertinent, relevant, and interesting matters that affect us all. Tune in every Wednesday, live on ZIZ Radio and streamed live on Facebook at SKNIS Media and ZIZ Online. InFocus, your government, your business.